So we are discussing the Indian foreign policy during the time of Lal Bahadur Shastri. As our friend has been telling that Lal Bahadur Shastri has a brief tenure, right? He is the second Prime Minister of India, and in his foreign policy there are a few specific points which you will have to remember. The very first one is the following: the pragmatic non-alignment. So what is this pragmatic non-alignment? So when you are talking about idealism, right? So if a country has to be non-aligned, then definitely it cannot take sides, right? So to say Ashok sir is not at all influenced by bias, right? That means whatever the candidate that may be, so based upon the facts and figures I will have to judge, not based upon the region, not based upon the religion, not based upon the caste, no discrimination whatsoever, right? So when we are talking about non-alignment, so obviously we have to be non-aligned, but so we have gone for the pragmatic non-alignment where you are slightly aligned towards the Soviet Union, right? So it is not idealist, right? Idealism doesn't really work. Idealistic non-alignment didn't really work. So we have understood. So we are slightly tilted towards the USSR. So that is the first fundamental point. And the next one is the focus on the regional security, right? So immediately after the world, after the India's independence, so we had already fought war, right? So one with the Pakistan as well as the China. So that is the reason why the regional aspects are to be given the greater importance. And the next one is self-reliance in the defense. So this was the time where the self-reliance in the defense has actually started, because we have already fought a war. So you cannot depend upon a third country for all the defense related purposes, right? So if every time a thief enters into my house, so if I have to borrow a stick from the neighbor's house, how is it relevant? How is it even possible? So that's why we have understood after fighting 1962 war and decisively lost in the war that we have to depend upon our own arms and ammunitions. So that is when self-reliance in the defense have actually started after 1962 war with China. And the finally is the soft balance, right? So when it comes to the soft balance, so when it comes to the superpower, we already said it is a pragmatic non-alignment, right? And at the same time, so if you are totally aligned to a particular country, the other country will not give any kind of a support. So the balance is what is required. So during his regime, he has followed the balanced non-alignment, right? So he kept equidistant slightly with all the USSR as well as the USA. Okay, so these are
like in what ways he maintains soft balance?
So in what ways, in the sense I'll tell you, right? So when it comes to USA as well as the USSR, obviously we are taking the support of USSR, right? We are slightly aligned towards the USSR. At the same time, so we are aligned towards the USA also. We are taking the funds from the USA. We are telling that our support will be there, right? So in that way, so we have whatever the conflict the USA and USSR have, we did not actively involve. So we kept ourselves at a distance and we are taking the benefit of both the countries, slightly aligning towards USSR, because for all the technological developments as well as the military defense purposes, we are aligning towards USSR rather than the USA, right? So the tilt is towards the USSR, right? But at the same time we have balanced the both. And whatever the balance we are talking about during the time of Indira Gandhi regime, so it was totally lost. So we were completely disconnected with the USA during the time of Indira Gandhi, during the Nixon. So we call it Nixon-Kissinger foreign policy. During that time, so India as well as the USA diplomatic relationship were at the lowest point, right? We'll see. So the very first issue we're going to discuss during the time of Lal Bahadur Shastri is Run of Kutch issue, right? So when it comes to the Run of Kutch issue, that was the initial dispute that actually led to the 1965 war, right? So that was the initial issue. So the Run of Kutch issue is the salt marsh region. So what do you mean by salt marsh region? The regions which are highly concentrated with the salt, right? So we have this different ecosystem. Salt marsh ecosystem is one of the ecosystems which we discussed in the environment and ecology classes, right? So that was the salt marsh region. So they claimed the region of Run of Kutch. So because of that, the dispute has escalated and it has become international, and by the diplomacy, some of the portion of Run of Kutch has been given to Pakistan. So that was one of the issues that actually led during his time. And the next one is Lal Bahadur Shastri's doctrine. So when it comes to the Lal Bahadur Shastri's doctrine concerned, so India as a weaker nation, the perception that India is a weaker nation has continued after 1962 war with the Pakistan, right? So we have miserably lost a war, so that's why it had actually thought this is the right time to strike India. So that is the reason why it has put pressure on the run of Kutch issue, which has become the ground to see whether we gonna win a war or not. So during the run of Kutch issue, they have understood, okay, with the diplomacy, so we have taken some amount of the land, right? The ceasefire agreement has been done. So the India is not aggressive towards Pakistan, so we can actually start Operation Gibraltar, 1965 war, right? So India as a weaker nation has been continued with the Pakistan, and which resulted in India-Pakistan war of 1965, we call it Operation Gibraltar, where thousands of Pakistani military personnel were infiltrated into the state of Jammu and Kashmir to create distrust against India, and finally to structurally destroy Pakistan, Jammu and Kashmir, and completely cede the territory into the state of Pakistan. So that was the main motive. So we call it 1965 war as the litmus test towards the relationship between the people of Jammu and Kashmir as well as the rest of mainland India. And in this 1965 war, we have won with the supreme majority. The trust of Jammu and Kashmiri people is towards India itself, right? So, and in this 1965 war, whatever the territories that were actually occupied by the Indian government or Indian military personnel were actually returned back to the Pakistan, which was completely opposed by the people of India. And the negotiation between India and Pakistan has actually done in the Tashkent. So chief negotiator being the USSR, and in the Tashkent itself, the Lal Bahadur Shastri has actually died mysteriously. So that concluded the reign of Lal Bahadur Shastri. Okay? And comes to Indira Gandhi foreign policy. And next comes to Indira Gandhi foreign policy, the third prime minister, and that was also a long tenure. Indira Gandhi's foreign tenure was a bit long, and it was divided into two phases. Right, because she has come to power twice with a brief pause where Janata government has come to the power because of emergency. Right, there was an emergency period. Because of that emergency period, Janata government has won the majority, where during that brief tenure the Congress government did not exist. So we divided the phase into the two different phases, but the foreign policy is more or less the same. Okay. And she is known for the bold, centralized and strategic approach to the foreign affairs. Right? She is extremely strong. Unlike the Nehru or Lal Bahadur Shastri, there is no the balance. Right? So she was very straight, she was very bold when it comes to taking any kind of international decisions. And when it comes to the backdrop, so it was the height of the Cold War era. So the dispute between the USA as well as the USSR were completely in the worst possible way. And during that time, the India still was towards the USSR. Obviously, the USA will not take it light. And at the same time, the Indira Gandhi being bold leader, so obviously she has put clear boundaries with the relationship with the USA. Okay? And decolonization in the Africa has actually started, and there was a shift of the global power centers. So this was the phase during that particular time. So what she has actually done in the foreign policy? The very first one is assertive non-alignment. Right? So when it comes to assertive non-alignment, it is a non-alignment with a tilt. Definitely we can see a tilt towards USSR. No doubt about that. And the stronger ties with the Soviet Union, especially post 1971 war. Why? In the 1971 war, America has supported? Obviously. So that's why our tilt is towards USSR. Right? And next one, regional dominance doctrine. So we have the India first approach in the South Asia. So this is an important point actually when it comes to the understanding of foreign policy between different prime ministers. So Indira Gandhi has focused on India first, whereas the subsequent prime ministers has focused on neighborhood first. Gujarat doctrine. right? The subsequent prime ministers have actually sought that the neighbors are the first, but here we can actually see the India first approach in the South Asia, and also ensure no external power influence the Indian subcontinent. She does not want any kind of foreign pressure on Indian soil, no matter what. The sovereignty, whatever the India has, that has to be upheld no matter what. And the next one is real politic over the idealism, right? So obviously the idealistic nature of non-alignment cannot exist, right? No matter what, right? So even the neighborhood foreign policy that we are talking about, ideally it cannot exist, right? So how many of you are telling that I want to become civil servant to serve the people? How many of you? No one. So self-interest. So do you want to become IAS officer because of the self-interest? Sir, I will become the best corrupt politician in the subsequent era. You're to serve the nation, you're to serve the people. Ideally, can it be always possible? Exactly. It cannot. Right? So you cannot help everyone. You cannot help everyone all the time. So obviously you pick and choose. Right? So whatever you can do in your power, only that you can do. More than that you can never do. Right? So policy was actually different. Right? You might have seen everybody arguing about the reservations. Right? Sir, there are poor people, many poor people in the open category. Yes. Will you be able to help with reservations more than what is required? That is the law. You cannot help everyone. You have to enforce the law. That is your objective. Right? So idealistic nature cannot really exist. Right? The same way, real politic over the idealism. So obviously strategy use of diplomacy as well as the military power. The both has to be balanced. And no hesitation in interventionist policy when national interest demanded. She was very straight, she was very rude that India comes first all the time. And she is ready to intervene, she is ready to strike everything back and give everything back. So national interest comes first. Right? And finally, the nuclear sovereignty has actually started during her era. Right? So in 1964, I believe. Right? 1962, I believe, during that time, China has become the nuclear country. China has become nuclear. So when China has become nuclear, so India has actually sent from the non-alignment movement that so foreign the nuclear policy has to be removed. You have to become the non-nuclear country, but it never accepted. Right? After China has become the nuclear country, so they have gone for the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, saying that other than the P5 nations, none of the other countries which are signing the nuclear non-proliferation treaty can go for the nuclear weapons, for which India is not the signatory. Right? Because so it is kind of biased, and at the same time you are losing your teeth, and there is no institutional mechanism to see whether the nuclear non-proliferation is truly functional or not. So because of all these factors, India was never the signatory. And now in the 1971 war, the war with Pakistan, we have understood the importance of nuclear diplomacy. Right? Use of nuclear weapons as a means of deterrence. Use of nuclear weapons as a means of deterrence. That means not to use. But when you have a nuclear weapon, there is a chance that the other person might actually not wage war with you, thinking that you may use the nuclear weapons. Right? If I have a stick in my hand, and if I am issuing marks, so will you make noise during that time? Definitely not. Not because I would beat, but there is a chance that I might. So that is the importance of nuclear weapon. Right? So nuclear weapons as a means of defense, not for offense. Right? So during the Indira Gandhi regime, she advocated the India's independent nuclear policy, culminating to 1974 nuclear test. Right? So in this we have already discussed that the Bangladeshi Liberation War, we have already known. So what are the different points why the East Pakistan and West Pakistan were totally different, right? And what actually led to Bangladesh Liberation War. And finally that has led to the Shimla Agreement, and based upon the Shimla Agreement, so the Bangladesh has become the independent nation, and we have recognized Bangladesh being an independent nation, the first nation to recognize Bangladesh. and the ceasefire line has become the line of control. And we have added one particular point that, so whatever the disputes that may arise between the India and Pakistan will be resolved through the peaceful bilateral negotiations only. Right? So that was the Shimla Agreement of 1972. And even now, when the issues of Pakistan as well as India were taken internationally by Pakistan, so we will be quoting the Shimla Agreement that, so whatever the dispute that may be, that has to be negotiated only through the peaceful bilateral negotiations. We will not entertain any kind of a country to intervene into the internal as well as external affairs of India. Right? If Pakistan has a problem, you come and talk to me only. If I have a problem with you, I will come and talk to you. Bilateral. So it is not trilateral or multilateral. We will not entertain any country's involvement in the issues of Kashmir or India and Pakistan. That is drafted in Shimla Agreement. And relationship with other countries, right? So with USSR, we have deepened the economic as well as the defense ties, and with USA, we have actually had not that good relationship during the Nixon era. So we call it Nixon-Kissinger foreign policy, the foreign secretary as well as the prime minister, right? During that era, so the relationship between India and America were at the bottom. They were not at all great. So we can actually say that was the era where the diplomatic relationship between India and America has completely paused. Right? One other reason is because we have gone for the nuclear weapon. Right? So there are multiple sanctions imposed on India economically as well as the trade way as well as in the monetary way. In every possible way, the sanctions were imposed on India. And with the China, relations remained cold post 1962. The relationship was not that good, and the border issues were totally unresolved even till today. Border issues were totally unresolved even till today. We have issues with China. But the fun part about the China is, for a long period of time there was no escalation until the 2020. Right? And Sri Lanka as well as the South Asia policy. So we asserted dominance in the Indian Ocean region. That is a very significant region that we are determining the authority in the Indian Ocean. So an entire ocean has been named after India, right? And the secure Indian Ocean region is extremely important for the dominance of India in the Asian countries as well as the South Asian countries, right? In the SAARC countries as well as the Asian countries, our dominance in the Indian Ocean region is extremely important. So asserted dominance in the Indian Ocean region and intervened diplomatically in the regional issues with the Bhutan, Nepal as well as Sri Lanka. Right, whatever the disputes that are arising in the Bhutan, Nepal as well as Sri Lanka, so we have intervened in those issues and opposed the foreign bases in the Indian Ocean region. So the China's entering into the Indian Ocean region can never be entertained at any cost, because it implicates the security of the India and its national interest. Right? And in 1974, Operation Smiling Buddha, right? So we have conducted in Pokhran, Rajasthan, underground nuclear tests, and we declared India as a nuclear capable state and maintained it was for peaceful purposes only. Right? We maintained that it is for the peaceful purposes only, but it shaped the India's global standing that we will definitely become a nuclear country. It is necessary to become a nuclear country. Right? So that is Operation Smiling Buddha, and the next test was actually done in 98. Right? And during this era, so the phase of emergency, we call it as the darkest days of independent India, where fundamental rights were completely lost. Right? So there was a kind of dictatorship. So why? So because in the elections there was a misuse of public resources during the election campaign. Because of that, so her position was in jeopardy and it was ambiguous, and the court has actually said that okay, you can be seated in the parliament for a few months until the further notice has come, but you will lose the right to vote. So she was at the verge of losing her seat. So during that time, so she has declared emergency and finally changed all the laws that was charged against her. Right? So that is the 42nd constitutional amendment. We call it Indira Constitution or the mini constitution. And after Janata government has come, they have rechanged the entire law and made this 44th Constitutional Amendment Act. Okay? So the court ordered her to be stripped of her parliamentary seat, and some opposition members called for her to resign in the aftermath. So because of that, she chose to declare the state of emergency and restore order, and then move to change the laws she was convicted under. Right? Thug life. Literally. And the state of emergency gave Gandhi sweeping powers likened to the dictatorial rule that curbed the political dissent and muzzled the press. The press cannot publish whatever the news. It was completely censored. The opposition were completely put behind the bars. Right? Nobody would dare to speak against Gandhi, Indira Gandhi. So that is the reason why it is regarded as the darkest days of independent India. And because of this, she lost her power, and later, after Janata government collapsed, again she came to the power. Right? And when you take the differences of Indian foreign policy between the Nehru as well as Indira Gandhi, you can actually see the Nehru is idealistic. Right? So non-alignment is non-alignment, whereas Indira Gandhi, it is pragmatic. Right? A tilt. And non-alignment, it is a pure doctrine, whereas we have a strategic alignment. So based upon the national interest, we align to one country or the other. And use of force. Nehru was totally reluctant in use of force, whereas Indira Gandhi is extremely decisive. Right? She is extremely bold. And superpower policy, it is equidistant during the Nehru. So when it comes to the two major superpowers, he stayed far away, equidistant to either of those. But here we have a tilt towards the USSR. And finally, the nuclear policy opposed the arms race and authorized testing. Right? This is how the foreign policy was totally different compared to that of Nehru as well as Indira Gandhi. Right? So and after that, Janata